I just started the stream without any storage, so that's going to be fun. I don't know if we'll have a recording to go back to. Spencer, I'm going to hand it off to you. It is the Rotoballer PGA show. We've gone from one technical difficulty to the other. Jens tried to be with us. He's one of our Rotoballer news desk guys. We couldn't figure out the audio on his side of things. Apologies for the delayed start. It's the Charles Schwab challenge. We're rocking. We're rolling. Spencer, what's cracking?
Xander Schauffele wins a major, and everything that can go wrong on the audio and technical side of things seems to be happening right now. But, very interesting tournament last week. We've had this discussion quite a bit on the show, and we're not the only show that's had it with Xander Schauffele. And I've been a very big proponent. And obviously it looks great when he ends up winning a major on the back end, even if I didn't have the pre-tournament wager on him. But, this narrative that he could not win a golf tournament in my mind was so skewed in the wrong direction. Like, how can we have a golfer that had 7 PGA Tour titles, hadn't won a tournament in 2 years? If you really look at data golf, he was expected going into Sunday to win about 1.6 of those events. His actual performance put you more in that 1.1 sort of range. So he had underachieved on Sunday by about a half of a tournament. But, sometimes it just takes a putt lipping in on 18 that makes the whole difference there. And one victory from Xander leading into this would have been a completely different narrative. And we can go back and forth on exactly what his price should have been for these events. And I think that's more of where the real discussion comes into play, because I don't think he was necessarily an 8-1, 10-1, 12-1 sort of a golfer that we were getting on a lot of these spots. But this win was long overdue for Xander. So I'm happy to see him get across the finish line. He's been the second best player in my model over the past year. There's a lot to like about his game moving forward. And hopefully, one can turn into many for him.
Yeah, that's the thing is something's true until it's not, which is also fair, right? So you can say that he's always had it inside of him. He's always been a closer. He just hasn't had it happen. He, on hole 10, went back to the same old Xander, bogeying the easiest hole on the golf course to pretty much give 2 shots back to the field, and then went birdie right after that, which was the stuff we haven't seen from him. It did. Look, I have to put up both my hands and say I've called Xander a stick when in fact he's a whip, and he whipped my ass this week. And I had a Bryson outright, and I had a good feeling that was going to cash because it was Xander in front of him, and he just never gave up. The birdie he made on 18 was clutch. The up and down he made on that par 4 after missing the green, that chip was so freaking good. He's got an 8-footer that he's likely going to make, or a chip he's going to knock stiff. Like when he misses a green, he's got those two kind of saving graces, and he came in clutch. Because Spence, when he was at the Wells Fargo, he 3-putted on Sunday. He leads the PGA Tour in 3-putt avoidance. He was doing stuff he's the best at. When he was under pressure, he was doing it poorly. He finally took care of business, and now he's a major champion. Congratulations. Could not have been a better situation for him. Scottie Scheffler without Ted Scott on Saturday kind of essentially took him out the picture. What an incredible situation that was, man. Like the round 2 performance after jail to shoot what he did in the way he did, Spencer, that is one of the most impressive feats I've ever seen from a sporting athlete ever.
Yeah, his adrenaline was definitely still running at that moment. It's, for all the days of any of the days that this could have happened for Ted Scott to leave and not be on the bag, that next day, I think Scottie would have been better on the day where all of this happened, because he could have at least had the adrenaline running, and Ted could have come in on Saturday and kind of put the ship back on course. But very unfortunate situation there for Scottie with how everything transpired. I completely understand how everything weighs on you overnight, and you wake up the next day and realize, crap, this is not good. And it's the thing is with golf too, and it's a fortunate thing for some players who get the win, and it's kind of deviating from the script that we're kind of on right now with this also. But you have to win when you have your opportunities to get these victories. And I think when we look at Xander, like, to just go back to him very quickly, Xander has been in so many opportunities to win events that at some point, I used to say this about Tony Finau, at some point, you just luck into a victory. You make a putt that you shouldn't have made. somebody implodes in a situation that they shouldn't have imploded in, and you backdoor a victory one way or another with it. And, for Scottie right now, this is his time to where I'm not saying that the stats are going to necessarily regress or we're going to go backwards on it, but he is the best player statistically that we have seen since Tiger Woods. And the more of these that he can put together, the better it's going to be for his legacy at this point, because you never know. We saw this run from Jordan Spieth in 2015. Statistically didn't look quite the same as what we're getting with Scottie Scheffler when you run the data from it, but same answer for Brooks Koepka. There was a bunch of victories there for a while. Hasn't had Rom. You're going to have to put the wins together when you get them. And I think for Scottie, this is one of those seasons to where if he doesn't win, I mean, what do you say? He already has one. If he doesn't win two of them, it's probably a disappointment at this moment.
Right. And the craziest thing was, Spence, this was listening to all the people that do this stuff, this was the tournament of the 4 majors that was the least likely he was going to win, because it was the easier a golf course for Scottie, the less he can separate himself from the field. And he still hung around. Jail, baby, no caddy. That's the holy grail of what could go wrong in your life. And you still somehow managed to finish inside the top 10 again in another major. That's absurd. So we'll have to see what he gets up to in the next 2, because but you know what, Spencer, I am concerned. I have Xander for a top 10 and top 20 in every single major. I think the fact that he's now won one hurts me.
I would agree with that probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fact that he was still gunning for one means he's going to keep chomping at that top 5, top 7, but maybe he can keep rolling. He's playing such good golf right now. It's kind of on autopilot. So what's not on autopilot was Jens's mic. It was on autopilot, on its own agenda, its own flight path. We'll have him on soon. We'll get the mic figured out and go from there. But we're gonna have his rankings. We're gonna go off Jens's rankings and see how it goes and do the show without him. He's in the chat, so he's hyping us up. He's very sad that it's not working out. It's all good, buddy. And no, we're just trying to get our Rotoballer news staff on the show. And sometimes your first podcast, there's some stuff that happens. It's all good, and it is what it is. So, Spence, what are we doing at Colonial Country Club this week? We've ripped up the grass. We've added 250 yards of length. What is going on?
There's going to be a lot of discussion this week about the impact that Gil Hands' restoration of Colonial Country Club is going to undergo here. There is over $20 million that was invested in the property. The goal was to turn it back to its original design. I do think you get 2 separate viewpoints on exactly how much influence that factor is going to have compared to past iterations of the contest. It's really interesting, Byron, and I'm sure you saw this with your numbers also, because to me, the way that I looked at this was essentially a glorified pitch and putt contest, but the caveat to that situation is it removes high-end birdie-making potential from the equation, and there's a reason why this is one of the most challenging courses. So you get these returns where you get this heightened answer from putts that are made between 10 to 25 feet, which means that the approach shots aren't being put as close to the hole as you would get on a common stop on tour. But then there's this 4% expected increase for strokes gain approach. So that's essentially telling me that irons aren't being hit as close to the pin as you would normally get, but the approach metrics are still going to demand quality production to find success. I think that probably means, and you can tell me your take on this, but a green in regulation probably is what ends up outweighing anything else. You do have smaller than average greens here. Put it on the putting surface, go from there. The winning score over the past 5 years has been in that range of average. About 12 under par is about what gets it done. I guess the question to that, Byron, will be, is this more or less than that total with the renovation that's occurred? Distance adds maybe a little bit more difficulty, but I also think you've had a couple examples in there where you've had some 8 under par winners. Wind is always going to be what plays a factor in Texas. If you get some wind, the course gets more challenging. But tell me what you think about the course, and we can go from there.
Yeah, I don't think the length is going to make that big of a difference. It's on 5 or 6 holes that the 200 yards have been added anyway. So it's 1 or 2 extra clubs here and there. I think one of the par 4s is now 50 yards longer. I'll be looking to live bet that hole potentially, if the numbers are still reflective of what it once was when it was 50 yards shorter. But outside of that, I think you can probably organically shift a few percentages from 125 to 150 to 150 to 175, like just by adding those bit of additional yardages, you're going to shift a bucket here and there. But overall, you're still going to see a vast majority of shots come from 125 to 200. And that, to me, is the proximity bucket range I will be looking at very, very closely. And I think that makes the most difference to me this week. So that's basically it for me. Again, birdie rate's not going to be there. I'm using medium scoring conditions, kind of middle of the road, potentially even difficult, I would say, Spence, based off of what we could see here this week with these new greens. We've gone quail, new greens, bouncy ass. Then we go to Valhalla. It's like diving into a foam pit, from 250 yards away. And then we go to this one, and now we've got another new golf course. It's been, isn't this one of the oldest tournaments on the Rota? But yet we've got a brand new golf course because they decided to toss $21 million at the venue and add 200 extra yards. So I hope I can find a sugar mama that does that to my kind of well-being going forward. But let's take a look, Spence. We got Jens's we've got his rankings. It's hilarious that we're going to be doing the show without the guy whose rankings we are using. But hey, it's all good, and we're going to have a fun time doing it. So I'm going to pull up his rankings. I'm going to use my model as well. I'm going to get rid of some banners, and we're going to rock and roll. So Jens had Kevin Yu as his number 1. I have him as my number 8. You've got him as your number 3. We've got a lot going on here along with the graphics, but it looks like we kind of tidied up now a bit. Hit me with why he's your number 93, and then I'll let you know with my number 8, and hopefully bat for Jens as well.
Some of the upside metrics are going to like him a little bit more than this 93rd place rank that I have for him. The recent form leaves a lot to be desired. There's a handful of miscuts that you're going to get about a 30% weight in my model. That's going to push him down. The weighted proximity numbers always look good for Kevin Yu. He's inside of the top 25 for me. I think my biggest concern with this comes down to the putter, because you do need to make putts here. And the one thing I didn't talk about when we discussed this course, and it really graded as a significant metric in my sheet of something that I was looking to oppose in the opposite direction of it. So it carried very little weight, I guess would be the better way to word that. But you lose a lot of the off the tee data at this course of what's important here. Distance is completely mitigated for the most part. You do have some accuracy that's going to help, but that 12th place return that I have for him in weighted total driving, I think removes one of his massive weapons that he does have. I think he's a fringe cut maker one way or another. This total that I have here would suggest a little bit worse, but I kind of go with that answer just because he does shoot into the top 70 for me for upside. So normally that's what I'm looking for one of those boomer bust sort of options, but he's not going to be a name that I'm playing this week. I'm going to be, I guess, compared to your guys' rankings, definitely fading him based off of that answer. But he's just a boomer bust commodity for me that I think has a little bit too much downside for my liking.
That's totally fine, Spencer. I've got him ranked 8th. Sorry, Jens got him ranked 10th. Now that's in my upside rankings. If I'm going to safety, it's 47th, so that's his 75th percentile numbers are going to be through the roof because he's got that volatility and that ceiling. By the way, he's got 17% of his starts have been top 10s. 17% of his starts have also been top 20s. And that's the funny thing, only 29% of his starts have been top 40s. So I guess the safety numbers are speaking for themselves right there, right? To have your top 10 and your top 40 numbers be within the space of 11% or 12% it needs to be double from top 10 to top 20, then double from top 20 to top 40. He's only got he's doubling it from top 10 to top, not even, so he's got that upside. I bet him for a top 10, Spencer, at plus 600 for a top 10, which to me, it's a massive, huge bet, but your exposure is limited at plus 600. And he's done this thing 2 or 3 times already. And he's also played nicely at Pebble in the past. He's a ball striking beast. We don't know what the short game does. Sometimes he shows up in the top leaderboard, sometimes he doesn't. So I'm assuming our guy would have had the same kind of agreement there, right?
He's also a good win player, which works in Texas. I guess my concerns, even just to add an additional answer to this, I guess it comes down to me of what do we think this course actually and this is this was a conversation that we had last week about Valhalla. It's if we think that this winning score is, to me, he's probably better suited if it's more birdies than less. Like
Yeah.
his birdie making numbers are great inside of my model. Some of the other stats push in the other direction. So if this is a winning score of 16, 17, that Hans's restoration has made this slightly easier, probably is a better fit in that regard.
Yeah.
But you can also make the opposite end of that argument that he doesn't necessarily make putts either. So does that mean that a harder course is better? I'm going to say no, it's easier for him, but that's kind of where we land here.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And, like we've discussed here, there's a lot of stuff to be concerned about, but I think we both liked his upside. The safety, we're obviously very aware of. Spencer, hit us who your 10th guy is in your model and what you will be doing for your 9th guy as well.
So number 10 for me, and I thought I was aggressive on him, and I believe you're even more aggressive than I am. I had Mark Hubbard, number 10. There was so much that I liked about him this week. He opened in that 110 to 120 to 1 range. He's been pushed down now into that 90 to 1 section. I still think there's value to be found there. I keep talking a lot about how a lot of these off the tee metrics are removed from the equation at this course. And Hubbard is one of the steady climbers that I have in my sheet when you remove the off the tee data for him from the mix. Weighted scoring, he's 7th in my sheet. He's 10th when I took this weighted approach plus weighted putting plus GIR percentage. The total driving is what's always holding him back in these spots, but 42nd for accuracy. He has that into the mix for a course that has a 0.25 stroke difference in accuracy over distance. And while that may not seem like a lot, it's a pretty large discrepancy between those two numbers. And it's kind of why I keep going back to where, despite this extra yardage that has come into play, I still don't have distance as anything that I'm looking for. Like, it's the least amount of a distance weight that I've put in my model for any tournament that we would be looking at over the past year. So I think Hubbard's skill set fits very well for this type of a course. We've seen him spike in some of these rounds. He just has been unable to put it together for 4 days. I think this is a perfect spot for him to potentially get that answer. And whether we're looking at the 90 to 1 price now or potentially into this, 110 if you got it early, thought Hubbard was a very intriguing choice.
Yes. I've got him actually, Jens had him at number 6. I have him 31st. His upside, like top 5 rate, is just not getting there for me as good as he is. The guy was 2nd at the PGA Championship. One of my buddies had a plus 940 top 20 bet on him or something ridiculous, and he finished 24th. Like, this is what you're getting from Mark Hubbard, is these like disappointing good finishes that, as a professional golfer, is making you tons of money and keeping your tour card. But at the same time, as a bettor, he's just not giving you the upside we're looking for. So I've got him ranked 31st. Mark Hubbard is 6th for Ian, and you've got him number 10. So figured I'd just knock out number 6 while we were chatting about Mark Hubbard for you and kind of dive into Jens's guy, who is 9th in his model, and it's Austin Eckroat. He is really, really doing his thing, man. Like, if you take a look at what Eckroat's iron play has been up to, he dives way up the leaderboard in my model rankings when you're taking a peek at those. And he's a winner at the Cognizant Classic. If you kind of assume Colonial is that positional kind of a venue where you can, kind of plod your way around it like he did, who the heck knows what he can do. Spence, why have you got Austin Eckroat ranked 23rd in your model?
It's probably a little bit lower than it should be. I mean, I don't know if I can get into this top 10 ranking that the two of you put together with it, but I certainly understand the intrigue with it. It's probably the lower weight that I had on off the tee data, but he is the number 4 expected total driver for me. And if we talk about this added distance that you're going to get on a couple of these approach shots, and if you want to push some of these proximity metrics into that 150 to 200 range and add a couple percent there, that's where Eckroat does most of his work from. He's 5th from 175 to 200 inside of my model. I have him as a value. I mean, I do want to note that even though I'm a little bit lower than you guys are, I thought he should have been in that high 7,000s, low $8,000 range. I think he's a very intriguing play. I'm curious to see where the ownership lands, but Eckroat, for me, even at some of these major championships, like at the Masters, he was probably my favorite value on the board, and it just started so poorly on Thursday that he never quite turned it completely around. Even when he did, he still ended up finding a way to mess it up at the end of that round and then again on Friday. But I think he's a really intriguing value that even becomes better in my model when I ran it for some of these safety marks.
Yeah. Ian saying that, T16 year last year was a lot to do with the fact that he got him inside his top 10 there at number 9. Again, course history here is very sticky historically, but we've got a brand new course with brand new grass. Who the heck knows what's going to happen? Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's something. We'll wait and see and figure that out. So number 8 for Ian and us was Daniel Berger. And this is a very interesting kind of a ranking, Spencer, because you've got him 30th. I've got him 82nd. Ian's got him 8th. So I'll go ahead and just say I've done 0 manual adjusting to his number at 82. I will do it when I start really seeing like top 20 results, like once I start seeing the high end finishes, even at the Myrtle Beach Classic, the finish there wasn't the best, in a weaker field at a venue that I felt like really suited his game. I think Daniel Berger's obviously won this tournament. There's tons to like about him. His game seems like it's moving in the right direction, but maybe I could get him inside the top 50 right now, sit him around 30 with you. For me, a top 8 is a bit of a push. I would have loved to have heard Ian's take on Berger there, but I think maybe he was just way more optimistic on his return to form than we might be.
Yeah, I mean, I think like if I was speaking for him of what some of these reasons are, you look at a golfer here who has won this tournament before in 2020. You look at some of these metrics, and I agree with your point. Like, we don't know exactly how far back he's gotten from what his optimal performances were, but number 4 in my model in strokes gained total in Texas, number 1 in my model when you take these shorter par 70 courses, he's inside the top 10 for wind. A lot of these other metrics for weighted scoring in that is where he gets pushed further down my sheet. So 30th overall, 46 for upside. That's really taking some of this more recent statistical form that we've gotten from him. The safety marks is what saved it for him, just because his course history was such a, I guess, pronounced return that I got. And the interesting thing about a model is, unless you go in and you hand construct this a little bit differently and you make some deviations to it, my model is not aware, just like your model is not aware, that he took a bunch of time off.
Yes.
That's something that is not known in the equation here. It's pulling numbers from before that, and it's then pulling some of the more recent numbers, and it's salvaging this profile a little bit. I do think, though, at this upper $7,000 price tag, he's one of those options that if the ownership ends up not being massive, I do think he's a fringe play one way or another here. It's just you kind of have to know what you're getting into and know that there's risk involved. And if popularity ends up following on this play, I'll probably pivot to another option.
Yeah, that's just the thing. It's a DFS play. You're going to definitely kind of monitor that ownership. He's somebody that's got that potential, right? Like at a golf course like this, he's 1 year before. We know the accuracy. We know how he's number 1 trait, Spencer, though, when he was Daniel freaking DB straight vibing Berger, was scrambling. Like he could scramble from anywhere. He was ridiculously good at getting up and down. His short game was elite, world class. It just hasn't shown up yet. And it takes of all the skill sets of the 4 main, strokes gained categories, I'd say your short game likely takes the longest to show back up again, because that's where the most nuance and the most, margin for error is in that part of the game. But when that does, I'm going to be right back on DB, because that's what made him Daniel Berger, So, Spencer, who's your 7th ranked golfer for the Charles Schwab Challenge this week?
So I had Christian Bezaden out 9. I had Lucas Glover 8. If we want to get into more of a conversation with them, we can. But I had Keegan Bradley number 7, and I'd actually prefer to have this Keegan Bradley conversation over a lot of these names, because I assume that ranking is going to be substantially higher than most people are going to get for him in the space. Mm-hmm. I really liked the way that Keegan Bradley fit this course, and I think that this is going to be a spot, and I could be wrong. We'll see where the ownership lands here. This feels like the contrarian pivot. Maybe he ends up being popular. Maybe I end up being wrong on that, but this feels like the name to where you kind of differ yourself and get into this different route with Bradley here, because there are a handful of players. He would be one of them. We'll talk about Brian Harman a little bit later. When my model likes these guys, it likes them to the extreme measure, and when it dislikes them, it's trying to find a reason to fade them. But usually Bradley and Harman seem to work in unison in a lot of these tournaments, where it likes one, it likes the other. So We'll have that conversation later about where I have Brian Harman. I mean, you might think it's an egregious total that I have for him, but Keegan Bradley for me would be number 7 just because of some of that ball striking that he brings to the mix here.
Hey, Keegan Bradley isn't the worst bet in the world, Spencer. I'm kind of happy to hear that he's in your top 10 because I've got him ranked 15th, and I actually have him to win this tournament at 70-1. And I also have him. Yeah.
I just want to say one thing about that. So I actually wrote this in my article over at Rotoballer. If I could have an ability to reconstruct this card, I think Keegan Bradley at 70-1 was probably one of the best values on the board. And, I got some nice numbers on the guys that I did, and they dropped a little bit from the price that I got them at. But I don't know that there's this massive discrepancy between Keegan Bradley and like a Harris English, for example. I think they're very similar. And one of the guys has now dropped to, which I bet him at 40-1. You could have even gotten 50-1 if you got it earlier, but he's in that 30 to 35 range, which I kind of think has reached this point of being unbettable. And then you have Keegan double the price, and I don't see this massive difference between them. So that to me is one of the reasons why he's an intriguing pivot, whether it's in the outright market. I think he's a very good outright wager to consider. And that might be the one, Byron, because we were talking before the show that you were telling me that some of these outright wagers, you feel like you can't get them through the finish line sometimes. I am very good at putting the second or the first name on my list that didn't make the outright card. And that's the name that ends up winning the golf tournament. We see it happen a lot of these weeks. So Keegan Bradley would be that option for me. You might be in a good spot there with that Keegan ticket.
Dude, I sincerely hope so, Spencer. I need a dub. And you want to know what's even crazier in my one and done world? I win Scottie Scheffler at the Genesis Invitational. He went and won 4 of his next 5. Then I took who did I take at? I took Brooks at the Masters, sucked it up, but then went and won his next live event. I think the following one after that. Then I took Rory at the RBC Heritage. He went and won at Wells Fargo. Then I took Xander at Wells Fargo, and then he goes and wins a major the following week. So Bryson DeChambeau is winning whatever tournament he plays in this week because I took him as my one and done last week. But I'm just kind of bitching because I need a place to bitch, and you are very good at listening to me bitch about my golfers. So we'll see what they can do, because this is the thing, right? Keegan Bradley gained the most strokes off the tee at the PGA Championship last week. We go into a golf course that you need to keep your ball in the fairway. That combination of distance and accuracy that Keegan Bradley's always had is really going to put him in a good shape off the tee this week. So to me, when I saw the ball striking, I mean, it's going to be hard to lead on approach as well after driving the ball that well, just because of how strokes gained works out. But his ball striking was top 4, top 5, still very good stuff. So if that short game just shows up, and if you just need to ball strike your way to -8, that's what he can do. And let's see what he can do at 70-1. I'm very excited about it. So where do you have Siwoo Kim, Spencer? Ian's got him ranked number 7. I've got him ranked number 16th. I guess you've got him ranked 27th. I know your answer. So tell us why Siwoo is 27th for you, because he doesn't have a top 5 in the last 12 months.
He had a negative trajectory in my model. When you just look at the output for expected strokes gained total on any generic course, he's 6th in this field for me. When you put it specifically for this tournament, he fell to 30th. A lot of that had to do with the weighted putting. I ramped up putting, and that's one of the reasons why some of these names ended up drifting in different directions, I guess. Weighted proximity looks great. The total driving is going to be good. It's a lot of these golfers for me where I think Siwoo for the price is probably overvalued for the reason that you just talked about. There's been a very consistent output from him in the results that we're getting. It's not necessarily this, outside of, I guess, last week, but it hasn't necessarily been this inconsistent nature from Siwoo that we've talked about for years of it's a victory and then it's a miscut and then it's a top 5 and then it's another miscut. He's been very steady for a while now, but in that process of it, he's lost some of that win equity and some of that upside. He's been hovering around inside the top 20 without much better than that. And unfortunately, when you continue to provide results like that, you all of a sudden increase, whether it's your outright price where it decreases or your DFS price increases. So I thought 9,600 was probably a little bit too expensive for him for what we're getting from his lack of recent upside. think from a safety play, there's a lot to like about his profile. But even if you look at this course, like historically, 29th, withdraw, miscut, miscut. I don't really want to take on that profile for that price tag.
No. And I was very tempted, Spencer, because that's telling me I've got a minor edge over here when it comes to Siwoo Kim in the top 40 market. He's minus 170 for a top 40, which is a 63% implied probability. He's doing that 71% of the time. But it's minus 170. Like, you have to lay monstrous juice on a guy who's really struggled at this golf course. So I couldn't quite get there on him. I'm assuming Jens just loves his ability to keep his ball in the fairway. I'm assuming he just loves the ball striking side of things. And now that the putter seems to be kind of getting itself together, he's a very enticing prospect, but the results just aren't coming to fruition, right? Like, all the stuff's there, we're just not getting the results. So we'll have to wait to see what Siwoo can do with the short game to kind of get himself across the board. He has Mark Hubbard, which we've already spoken about. So we're going to dive to our 5th ranked guy, Spence, who is, for me, 6th in the model, which I'm a little disappointed in my model for kind of ranking 6th. Keith Mitchell, the leading driver of golf balls in the PGA Championship and US Open since 2017, missed the cut last week. I had him in my farewell fiver. He couldn't beat Brendan Todd and some other, Alexander Bjork, two of the shortest hitting sons of guns on the PGA Tour, and Keith Mitchell couldn't get it done. And that was my only 3 ball that I lost of the 4 for my round 1 farewell fiver, and Keith absolutely nuked it. So the driving, the irons, amazing. The top end finishes, not there. Like, where are you going to show up, Keith Mitchell? Spencer?
So if I ran this for upside, which is a weird answer for a golfer that doesn't, I always talk about this. Upside for me is more of the statistical output of when we ignore form and course history into the mix of it. He sees this steady increase for me in that area, but we talked about this off air, Byron. I also had Keith Mitchell last week. I had him as a top 40 at plus 165. These outputs from him just never quite deliver the way that you want them to for whatever reason. I think he's an expensive price tag at 8,600. I think he's probably a fade candidate if you could find him in a matchup. He kind of has that negative movement for safety that I normally would like to take on. Ball striking numbers look good. 22nd for weighted proximity. You've talked about all the weighted total driving stuff. I keep talking about how I've reduced the impact in my sheet for that reason, but it's all those other factors that come into play, primarily with the putter, primarily with some of this around the green game that he puts together.
That's his biggest issue, man.
Yeah.
It's the disaster there.
We're already trending in a direction too, for whatever it's worth. Like, he is becoming an underdog to every single person that he's priced against in a matchup, which is usually a bad start to the week when you see that output just over and over again.
Exactly. And the thing is the ball striking is there. Like, if you're going to overweight your ball striking metrics in your model, Keith's going to show up because he's just doing it so well. He's just, when it's mattering, not quite taking care of business, Spencer. So who's your 5th ranked guy?
I do want to touch on what Doug just said about Bezadenhout also, because I skipped over him at the number 9 spot, and I'll even merge both of these in together. So, whether it's Bezadenhout or Glover or Hubbard or Harris English, who for me is my 6th guy, and Sepp Straka is my 5th guy, these are a lot of like the same players that we're looking at, to where English and Hubbard and Bezadenhout, they struggle off the tee. And since I've removed that from the equation here, it's really starting to skyrocket a lot of these names up my list. I think Bezadenhout is probably an intriguing play just from a safety answer. I always worry what his upside actually is, but 9th in my model this week, 18th for upside, 10th for safety. I'll talk about Harris English really quickly at the 6th spot, just because I said him and Bradley were very similar.
Before you do that though, Spence, I've got Bezzy 5th for safety. So his long run metrics and his just baseline stuff is amazing at this golf course. And I think he's had some good form yet too. So there's a lot to like from him. His upside goes to 22nd for me. So just thought I'd pop that in there while you transition.
It's the same similar movement that I have. It's a little bit more extreme on both ends, but that's kind of what you get from Bezadenhout in a lot of these spots. Let me ask you this before I talk about Harris English. Where do you have him in your model this week?
Harris English for me is a good question. I got to find him. He is 11th.
So he is the number one expected putter for this tournament. A lot of the off the tee data, if we look historically and recently, he's losing a lot of strokes in a lot of these events that he's even finding success at, like negative 2.2 strokes at the Arnold Palmer, came in 21st. Negative 2.3 at the Valero, missed the cut. Yeah. Negative 1.2 at the PGA Championship, comes 18th. It is all being done by the putter right now. But I think what my model is anticipating to happen in this spot is we have an accurate golfer who's going to find fairways at one of these shorter courses. The proximity numbers still leave a ton to be desired, but it's kind of like the same answer that I've talked about quite frequently in these last recent weeks with JT Poston. These are names that are better suited for these shorter tracks. When they qualify for these bigger tournaments and these longer events, some of these names run into problems where the off the tee data goes south, the proximity numbers are a little bit out of their wheelhouse. I don't think that that's necessarily the prototypical outlook that you should be expecting from these players. This is elevated events and major championships that they have gotten themselves into. So you're going to see them playing those tournaments for that reason. I think they're playing better golf, though, than the numbers might suggest. So my long-term metrics, like both Poston and English, even if you look at Poston, the recent results are going to hate him. And I think if we want to talk about another potential pivot option, nobody's going to want to play JT Poston with the recent form that he has. But, you know, I talked about it. I believe it was at the Heritage, I want to say, for Poston. I think it was that. But
he finished top 5 there.
Yes. That's like the same exact sentiment that pretty much comes into play during that tournament where everybody was off him that week, and the metrics are actually better suited for that course, and the game may be in a better spot than people believe. So I think any of those players, like we can go back to the Bezadenhout part of this question, but any of these guys that off the tee are not necessarily the ones that find success. This is the course that you can have those high-end finishes, and it's why I'm a little bit more aggressive on a Mark Hubbard than I normally would be in this spot, just because it does suit him so well.
Yeah, everyone's live if you've got the pre-required skill set. Yeah, you're not going to be blackballed if you don't have distance, right? Like anyone can have accuracy. If you got tons of distance, you can hit a 3-iron as straight as Brendan Todd hits his drive. So that's, you know, what this course brings. And we've got all 130 guys pretty much with a shout to do it, Spen. So Ian had Tom Hoagie as his 4th rank guy. I have Tom Hoagie ranked 7th. With so much approach numbers going into my model, I've got about 40% right now. That's likely going to kick up a lot. Tom Hoagie is exceptional across the board. If you take a look at some guys' numbers, they good from 100 to 150, struggle a little bit from 150 to 200, pretty good from 200 and out, or some combination of that. Tom Hoagie is just exceptional. It doesn't matter what golf course you go to, the iron play is going to translate because he's just that good across the board. The driving inabilities, you know, his lack of accuracy, his lack of distance, only the lack of accuracy helps now, or doesn't. The lack of accuracy hurts less than the fact that he's lacking all that distance as always. And then the putting has been great for him the last little while. So there's a lot to like. I'll be betting him top 20. He's been a top 20 machine the last little while. I fancy him in a big way.
I seem to be the Debbie Downer on this show. When we put up all 3 of our rankings, I am always in my own world of where I have it compared to.
Which is fun, you know?
I just, if I'm directly comparing, I would rather play Harris English for cheaper. I would rather play Sepp Straka for much cheaper than that. I think the approach play and some of the recent results that we have gotten from Hoagie, like he has strung together a plethora of top 40 finishes or top 45 finishes for the most part over the course of this season. We're still lacking a lot of those high-end returns that we would want to see. And I think he's going to be very popular for DraftKings. And for that reason, with the ranking that I already have, I already can see it just based off of your guys' rankings with it. Like I'm going to be lower than public consensus for a course that everybody's talking about how important approach metrics are going to be. And Hoagie is going to, for the most part, break a model in that regard. Like he is the number 1 player in my model for weighted approach plus weighted putting plus GIR percentage. even with that being a 20% return in my model, he still could only get up to 19th in my sheet from a statistical standpoint. And then he was 19th overall because there were some concerns with the course history. He has generated nothing at this tournament over the past 5 years. I mean, he has nothing better than a 40th place, and he's played it every single year. So I worry a little bit that there may be just a little bit too much popularity for him for a game that looks better on paper than it maybe actually suits this course.
Spencer, you nailed it, bud. And I won't be playing him DFS. I will be playing him in the top 20 market because Tom Hoagie, 36% of his starts, 1 in every 3rd start, is a top 20. He does not have a top 5 finish in the last 12 months over that same stretch. Where's the upside? The Black IPs. We maybe Sia can say, get our guy Thor there to give us where is the love, where's the upside? Where is the upside, Sia Najad? Anyway, I'm losing it. 40 minutes into the show, I'm horrible at singing. Doug Gim also does not have a top 5 Sia, so he's not going to win this tournament either, along with Tom Hoagie. But you can bet him top 20 because he's got a million of those. Let's dive into our 3rd-ranked golfers and start getting into some guys, Spencer, that we actually want to chat about, because we've got some names in the top 3, and I can't find the 3rd guy. So mind me while I vamp 2 seconds to pull up number 3, But we've got Aaron Rai for our main man, Ian. I do not have him high, neither do you. Now, the funniest thing is you've got him ranked 11th. So you hit me with your rankings for Aaron Rai, number 11. Jens has him 3rd, and I have him 32nd. So 32nd to me is a perfect spot for him because he's a top 40 beast. Also, lacks that massive upside, the top 5 stuff, tough scenes. Sia seems to be in on all the guys that don't have top 5 equity, and that's why you come to the show, Sia, so you can seek help. I'm here for you, my friend. So please continue to show up so we can do that. Spencer, why is he 11th in your model?
I like Aaron Rai. I think this is a very good course for his skill set. He has the weighted proximity. He has the total driving that you would want to see. There were some ways that I ran my data that he creeped into the top 10 with it. I think this 11th place rank for a $7,800 golfer shows the value. Like when we're directly comparing a Daniel Berger versus him, I prefer the Aaron Rai route with it. That's kind of where I'm saying if Berger is going to be popular, I'd rather pivot into a different direction with it. But I think Rai is a more intriguing choice than I guess you do, Byron. And then just to answer the question from Doug about Sepp Straka, I had Sepp Straka 5th overall. I had him 11th for upside and 5th for safety. Straka was one of 9 players in my sheet for all 6 categories that I ran that graded inside of the top 60. I think with him in English, maybe more so than any of the other names that I actually put an outright ticket on, they lack some of the upside that I wanted to see from an entire outlook of this tournament. But the thing with English, number 1 in my model for putting. The thing with Straka, you take this weighted approach and this weighted putting and the GIR percentage that I keep talking about. He's a top 5 expected scorer in this tournament. And we know with Straka more so than a lot of these guys. I don't know if this is the type of tournament where we're looking at a birdie fest, but when he gets hot and when his game is on, he produces at one of the highest levels when he's actually in form. And I really like him this week. I thought at 50-1, even with that negative trajectory that I had in my model for upside, he was one of those names that I was still inclined to want to kind of take a chance on just because of that overall safety that he had in my sheet just from across the board. And that's normally not what I'm looking for when I'm placing an outright ticket. But I also think that when you look at this tournament in general, Scottie, Homa, Morikawa, I mean, those would be my big 3, and we can talk about those more in a second. But if you remove those 3 here, I think this is kind of a wide open tournament where there is a drop in quality versus a lot of these other events. So if you can at least write that narrative out that one of those 3 doesn't win, all of a sudden this opens up the game plan for, Sia talking about Doug Gim. My model like Doug Gim for upside also this week. Like he jumped as a fringe top 50 player overall to a player that nearly cracked my top 20 when actually trying to find win equity here. And that's an interesting answer for guys that you're talking about that don't seem to have that natural win equity that you would want to see. But I also think, I say this all the time, Byron, it's a very course specific outlook. Like if you throw me on the longest course in the world to go play, my driver going 17 yards off the tee is not going to look good. But if you take me to some mini putt course, I might all of a sudden have more upside than you would normally see. So I think your numbers make a lot of sense, like in a vacuum situation, but sometimes these venues just possess a little bit more upside than meets the eye. And the problem that comes into play is if the sports books agree with you, then you've lost your value at that point. If the sports books don't agree with you, then you potentially have one of those under the radar commodities that you can have in the placement market or an outright bet that you're getting value on.
Amen, dude. And would we go to the putt course for me to win my dollar back after Joaquim Niemann beat Will Zalatoris in epic fashion and cracked the top 40, and Will Zalatoris finished 41st? Like, what a dead ass. After Joaquim makes a cut on the number, Spencer, and then beats me by 1. So what do you have to say for yourself outside the fact that congratulations, owe you $1?
Well, I appreciate the dollar, Byron. I
just still haven't sent you, by the way.
I think you did. I think I saw
did.
It.
Actually, I did. Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I will say this, and we talked about this, and even when you posted the poll, I agree with your overall answer that Will Zalatoris putts a little bit better in majors than we normally would get. Although this tournament was more of a birdie fest, and I think that hurt him a little bit more than you would think. But, going into that Sunday round, I still thought there was a pretty good chance that Niemann was going to get across the finish line. I had about an 8-shot discrepancy when looking at what their projected scores should have been from their baseline when you took the expected short game metrics versus what we were actually getting. And even when we threw in the major championship results, which threw Niemann in reverse and got Will Zalatoris a little bit better, I was down 2 entering that round, and my model still thought it was about 6.5, 7 shots that I should have been up. So based off of that answer, I'm not surprised that Niemann ended up making a run. I think the lucky part for me is that he got himself into the weekend. And with the way he played on Thursday, it looked like the bet was going to have a lot of problems to get there. But I still stand by that wager being the right side of it. I do think, though, on Sunday, Zalatoris came crashing back down to earth, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think what we've learned with Zal, I know we're not even, speaking about this tournament, but it's important to know because he's a big name in the space. His game is not what it once was. What had me, Spencer, was the Arnold Palmer Invitational, the Genesis, Farmers, some really good performances at those big boy tracks. What we saw at the Masters, also, 12th place finish, not the worst finish in the world. Maybe in his second major back, after a while, we see a bit of a resurgence. No, what we've seen since the Wells Fargo has been dire. It's been rather disgusting.
Yes, but, I think in your defense of it, and that's kind of the unknown commodity that came into play, make that an 11 under par winner and not a 21 under par winner. Yeah. And Will Zalatoris has probably better projected finish than what we ended up getting from him.
Spot on,
not the right course with the way that it played. And that's the unfortunate thing. And we were talking about this a little bit off air. Both of us were profitable last week. And I told you, anytime that you can turn a profit at a course where it's been played twice there in the past 25 years, and there's been restorations to the course that have occurred to add extra distance and new things to the mix, and the game's at a different spot than it ever was. Like what Tiger Woods did in 2000 when he beat Bob May isn't going to be how golf is played at this moment with it. So profit is profit at the end of the day. We're trying to just turn a profit, whether it's a $1 profit like a Niemann over Zalatoris bet, or it ends up being multiple units that come into play. So I think it was a successful week. Like that's what we're always trying to accomplish at Rotoballer is we're going to give you our best results that we can give for what we have on hand. And when there's a lack of results that we're being able to pull from, it makes things a little bit more complicated. But I thought for what we got, like my head-to-heads worked well. A lot of your bets I kept seeing coming in over and over again. And you've been crushing different markets of there, which I'll let you talk about a little bit. But
yeah, I'll just bring this up because we're talking about making money and returning profits. This is my outright this week is Colin Morikawa. So I'm definitely losing that investment. But no, Spence, last week was awesome because I lost my $10 for my breaking 100. So $100. I lost my 10 in the outrights and I lost 15 in my parlay, like 3-ball parlays that I was bitching about earlier. So that was $25 total of my 100 that I lost. And we still made $18 profit. So, the placements were amazing. Sepp Straka was my ladder play for the week. He missed the cut. If he made the cut, I was going to have a really good week with him. I've in on him again this week as well at 45-1. I think he's going to be a great play. He's been consistently solid, and he's hyper accurate off the tee. He lost 3.5 strokes putting in round 2, lost 1.5 strokes off the tee in round 1. How can you tell I played a lot of him? I know all his metrics off by heart because of last week. So this is the situation we're in. He's playing great golf, but just sucked it up 1 week on Zoysia. That was the week for him to thrive. Couldn't get it across the line. Colin Morikawa, the reason I bet him, if you take a look at proximity numbers, from 125 to 200, that's where Colin Morikawa is still borderline elite, very good at. 200 plus, he sucks. He's got his new coach now. Maybe that returns back to form, but we're not going to see that many shots this week. We're going to see all the shots come from a spot that Colin Morikawa is still very, very good at. He's had a top 5 finish here, I think in his debut in like 2020 or something, but his short game has always held him back. Colin Morikawa is now like not even an underrated short game guy. He's a good short game specialist. Like that's where his game has moved to. And for him to miss every freaking putt under the sun on Sunday, congratulations, Colin. You made your final birdie on hole 18, one of the easiest holes on the golf course. But yeah, we are. Like the reason I ever bet him to win the major is because of that exact thing. So betting him top 10, betting him top 5 is totally cool in majors. I'm betting him to win this tournament. I'm thinking he can, if it gets to -7, -10, just do what he was doing on Sunday and just make 1 birdie and 17 pars kind of thing. That's what I need from him. And his game suits this golf course perfectly, Spencer.
Let me ask you this question. Do you have projected ownership numbers up in front of you?
No.
Okay, I do not either. So I will ask this from, it's tough because we're all going to have Scottie Scheffler number 1.
Colin's number 2 after that.
Yes, there's more of a price tag that comes into play with Scottie Scheffler, and I'm curious to see where the ownership ends up landing. You don't normally get a 3-1 golfer that's 13,300. I don't know which way the public is going to push that. I would assume he's still going to probably be very popular. I would almost make the argument that if we're directly comparing, this is the question I wanted to ask you. So let's say that Scottie goes off the board 25 to 35%, which is usually about where he is every single week. I mean, I guess like recently there's more of a price tag here that you're going to have to make some decisions, but he goes off at 25 to 35%. How would you rank? And we don't know the ownership on the other 3. Like that's going to be the catch to this.
Sure.
How do you rank Scottie Scheffler, Colin Morikawa, Jordan Spieth, and Max Homa? Because that's where some decisions are going to be made at the very top of builds. And I wrote this in my article. I don't necessarily think you even have to start in that section. There's a lot of different routes that you can go, but I do want to get your ranking of those 4.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Scottie, like, are we looking from a game theory ranking, or are we looking from just sure? Okay, so to me, I just think it's so difficult to build with Scottie at 13.3. Even with the 5K range, this week the field is watered down significantly. It's not a signature event. Your 5K bucket is full of people that you don't even really know how to spell their names. Like that's where you're going to be clicking in the 5s for Scottie. When you go to Colin at 11, we're getting $2,300 savings. You can click some names you know how to spell, and we're getting a guy who is likely going to be inside the top 10 here. Scottie's safety's ridiculous, but I'm going to put Colin as my number 1 DFS option, then Scottie number 2, and then I'll put Bilbo Baggins over here, Jordan Spieth. He's going to be 4th. Max Homa will be 3rd because of the safety. Spieth at this venue has that upside, but I do not trust that guy like I trust cones in a Louisville parking lot at 6 a.m. on a Friday morning of the PGA Championship. So, what's your take? Who are your 4 top guys in the top range there?
So you put it in the exact order that I was going to put it in, and that's kind of the discussion I wanted to have here. I tend to think that Colin Morikawa, people are going to see an $11,000 price tag. At least this is what I'm hoping, and think, yes, he's 2,300 less than Scottie, but I would still rather play Scottie. Or what probably more so comes into play, Jordan Spieth is 10,600. Look at Jordan Spieth's course history. Look at what he does in Texas every single time around. Max Homa, 10,400. Oh, I like Max Homa here for whatever the reason is that they come up with. And then you can also drop into the 9,000s. And I think names like Harris English and I think even Brian Harman, like some of these options I've talked about, will be very popular. Morikawa, to me, is the name to get unique and different because the price tag is going to be a little too tough for some people to stomach, I'm hoping. And the statistical profile here, he doesn't have the arraignment problems that Scottie has hanging over his head that is going to come into play over the next month. And like, he has to worry about everything that's happening there. Morikawa's, you kind of said it best, Byron. I think that his skill set for this course is almost perfect in a lot of the ways that you want to look at it. And I didn't get there in the outright market. And if I want to say Keegan Bradley was the name that was the closest for me that didn't make it, if I reconstructed my card in a different way, Morikawa would probably be the 1B of that answer. So I really like your outright card that you've put together right now. I'm going to make a prediction that if I don't end up hitting the outright on one of my names, I think this might be the week, Byron, that you get the outright winner here.
I was going to say, when I hit my outright, you're going to have the second place guy. Don't you worry, Byron. He's going to be there for you for sure.
Yeah, but I really like Morikawa, Byron, for all the reasons you said.
That's the thing, Spencer. I'm hoping he can just get so far ahead in the first 3 rounds that he can shoot a 72 or a 70, I guess, level par on Sunday and still win this thing, because the chasing pack can only get to 67. I don't know. I went with a gut feel. All I saw, Spencer, was key proximity numbers inside 200 yards, Collin Morikawa. Like, to me, that's just, it was like, I didn't even have my model made up when I clicked Collin Morikawa this morning. If that answers, like, I had this gut feeling that he's going to, and that price, dude, was nasty. You know, like, for me to go there at 14 made me really think that I liked him a lot.
This is a wild answer. There are certain ways that I could build my model that Morikawa would be as close to Scottie Scheffler in projection that we've gotten in a really long time. This is not necessarily the perfect. I know Scottie's been great here. I think Scottie's going to probably land another top 10. There were some outputs in my model that had more concerns with Scottie than we normally would get. And when we have a $13,300 price tag, that is what starts getting interesting to me, where, you know, if I don't take the baseline, or not the baseline, sorry, the 2-year running data that I have, and I reproject the strokes gained total for this specific venue, and I remove some of the putting from the mix, which hurts Scheffler, but also hurts Morikawa, and I just take the actual strokes gained total that they've put together, I can't even tell you how close Morikawa is to Scottie there to actually be the number 1 person in my sheet, which is a wild answer to give when Scottie is just dominating professional golf.
Dude, that's the thing, is because I almost wanted to say Scottie's in a league of his own, but if you build it in a specific way, Colin, there's an absolute way this goes his way. I can totally see him getting bodied by Scottie on a Sunday, because Scottie is just a heavyweight and Colin's just a little softy. But dude, like, watching him hit those shots on Sunday to the middle of the green when he was 5 shots behind on the back 9 was just infuriating. Like, dude, you're one of the best iron players in the world. Hit your ball close, please. Like, do something.
That's the Xander problem that had come into play so many times. Yes. Like, I wrote an article about this a few years ago, even when Xander was still winning. And one of the interesting things that I found when I ran the data was Xander, his GIR percentages were always really good, but some of the proximity numbers were not great. And that's because he was just playing to the middle of the green over and over again. And it's good enough to work you up the leaderboard. You make some putts and you get up there. But when the putts stop falling and, you know, you're just making par over and over again, and then all of a sudden you make your 1 or 2 big mistakes, which is what we saw from Collin Morikawa, what we've seen historically over the past 6 months to a year, I would say, in like the real contention that Xander had put together. Just got to be a little bit more aggressive. I do think that this course allows, we have smaller than average greens, and that's the other thing too that I want to note to it. Xander, to go to him for a second, always had better upside when you had smaller greens, just because, like, all of a sudden when you're putting it in the middle of the green, you're looking at 20 feet rather than 40 feet on some of those numbers. I think Morikawa has a very similar answer that can come into play here for him.
That's a great point, Spence. It's kind of like what Matthew Fitzpatrick did at Harbour Town, right?
Yes.
Because his proximity numbers suck, and you get smaller greens, it just organically shrinks your target zone, and your proximity numbers mind over matter. Like, it forces you to hit your ball closer because you got to hit the green. So,
and when you're a golfer like Collin Morikawa, you're already one of the better iron players to begin with. So it even ramps up that to another level.
Yes. And going into this week, knowing potentially that it's -8, that's going to be the winning score, -10 versus -21, you know, like, so we'll see what he can do. And by the way, I got a Scottie Scheffler top 10. I'm betting it -260. And I know it's out there, I've still got an edge, and I'm going to be riding the Scottie Scheffler top 10 train all the way home. That way, I'm going to get my $26 of my 100 out of my budget, almost guaranteeing my $10 back. Like Scottie Scheffler's finishing inside the top 10 84% of the time. Minus 260 is a 72% implied probability. Now, whether or not you call that an edge or not, there's other things involved. He's the clear number one in my model. This guy's playing in Texas now. The boxes are checked. I'll take my chances. I've been doing this juicy ass Scottie Scheffler stuff for the last little while, and it's been working out nicely. So, yeah. Spence, let's chat about some gourmet cray-crays. We can chat about some outrights. I want to chat about some guys that I haven't even spoken about yet. So let's kind of knock out a few names as we're getting out of here. I'll let you go.
I guess I'll just start us in the $10,000 section because we just had the conversation. It's a very easy move to the next group, but I'm going to say Gourmet is Colin Morikawa for all the reasons we talked about, and Cray Cray will be Jordan Spieth. I just don't necessarily trust him, even if we are in Texas.
Perfect. I will second that. What are you saying for the nines?
For the nines, I will say the Gourmet is Brian Harman, is the one golfer I've not talked about so far. So there were a lot of names for me, and I think this is what happens. Like, you have the Scottie, Morikawa, Homa. Those are the top three golfers in my model. And I keep talking, if you're willing to overlook those three, this is from an outright betting perspective. You have some interesting names that come into the mix, but I think when you have your top three golfers that are pretty much what the market is indicating to be the outcome there, you run into some weird spots just because some of the trajectory in my sheet for upside is going to just naturally start moving in the wrong direction on a handful of these names. You're going to have an option like Brian Harman, who's the opposite, which when my model likes Brian Harman, like Nick always jokes about this with me on our show when we do Better Golf. Like, he hates when I talk about Brian Harman being a top 5 win equity candidate in any single tournament, but I do think that's exactly what he is here. You have the opposite that comes into play on some of these names, like a Harris English or a Sepp Straka, that move a little bit in the other direction, but the overall rank for me was still so outstanding that that's the reason that I ended up punching the outright ticket the way that I did. But I'll say Gourmet is Brian Harman. I think for the people that I'm willing to fade here, or the names that I'm lower on, I'm probably still lower on Sungjae Im. I know he had been turning it around before last week. I think the name, though, that I'm probably the most out on would just be Siwoo Kim because of the price tag
and
that we're getting for him.
Likely.
And the ownership. I think he's going to be popular from everything that we've seen. So, like, the worst values for me were Siwoo Kim, Sungjae Im, Minwoo Lee. But I'd almost be more inclined to take a gamble on Minwoo than I would Siwoo.
Yeah. I remember having a matchup against Minwoo here last year, and he finished like 40th. And I was like, this guy sucks with his irons. Why is he playing so well? Oh, because he's hitting his driver to the area where he can pitch from. Like, he's just bypassing iron play because he's just cutting dog legs with 330-yard drives and pitching it onto the green, which he's pretty good at. Like, your irons can be pretty bad from 60 yards out. They're still going to be better than anyone from 125, so that's the situation there. With Brian Harman, Spencer, I was very close to betting him top 5 or top 10, but I went with a more conservative approach and bet him top 30. He's got 9 top 31s in his last 10 Colonial Country Club walks. He was a chalk donkey that 1 year and he missed the cut. Remember that year?
Yeah.
That was fun. So that was the
I
one
had him
year
as
he
my
missed
one and done, I believe, that
year.
year.
Oh my God. Yeah. There we go. So he's played well, yeah. But the upside has just not been there, really, from a top 5 perspective. I might be lying to you, but I was very comfortable with his top 30 rate at plus 100. I felt like that was a very fair number for someone that's been that consistent at this golf course. So I was definitely tempted for the top 5 because he's got the second highest top 5 rate in the field behind Scottie Scheffler. But it's been a while since he's had those top 5s. That was like API time, players time. That was Florida swing still.
If we want to call safety, and even though this is a little bit more of an upside market, if we want to call safety a top 10 or a top 20, I think he's one of the safer golfers in this field.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and he's got upside. Like, you don't realize it, but he does. Like, he's got tons of upside. So I'm in. I'm in on
Of
him for sure.
Of the names that are $9,000 and above that actually took a substantial increase in win equity for me based off of their overall rank, I mean, it's pretty much him. I mean, he's kind of in his own ballpark, if we're being honest. Like, he was the only one of that group that actually jumped into. I mean, there's a reason why I bet him at 40-1. Like, he was the only one that became a value with that answer.
Yeah. I mean, that 9K range is gross, dude. Like, there's warts all over everybody there. Yeah. Everybody. So I think my next guy would be Harris English, maybe. I'd say, I'd say my cray would be Tom Hoagie. Just for what he's given us upside-wise, $9,300, not worth the price tag, in my opinion. In the 8th, Spence, we've got Bezzy, we've got Billy Horschel, who I bet. So let me figure out what I bet him at. 60-1, Billy Horschel. I mean, we've got top 10 finishes at a major. We've got him winning alternate field events, going to a golf course that's very pitchy-patchy, Billy Horschel, blue-collar, buddy mentality. You know, like, this is your Billy Horschel classic, if you're asking me, and I'm all about it. So this guy's playing some good golf right now. That number's delightful. What, maybe wins another one.
It wouldn't shock me. I think for me, like, Keegan is probably where the pivot comes into play. I do like Straka as a name that's going to likely be popular. This section, though, in general, is pretty much the haves and the have-nots here. Like, there's a lot of players that I want to have in my build, and there's a lot of players that I am looking to get as far away from them as possible. It would be, I've already talked about Keith Mitchell a little bit for why I think he's overpriced. It would be Keith Mitchell. It would be Thomas Dietrich. We always get these outcomes with Dietrich where he provides one finish, skyrockets his price tag after. Nobody wants to play him, and nobody wants to play him at very cheap prices. I like Thomas Dietrich last week. He was one of my favorite plays in that sub $7,000 section. He essentially climbed into being a top 30 candidate for me in upside. We get a 4th place finish, which even goes beyond what that answer is. But now all of a sudden, he provides that result. He's a little bit more expensive. People always want to jump in and play him for some reason in these spots. And I don't know if that's going to happen this week, but 32nd for me overall. So we're not necessarily looking at a terrible number there. 72nd for his statistical profile. It's more of that safety of what I'm able to pull. He has the 21st here, which I regressed a little bit in my model to move backwards. You also have some really high-end finishes with the 2nd at the Houston Open and the 4th at the PGA Championship. But to me, this is, and I think you probably have been more correct on this than I have been historically. This is a golfer that when he makes the cut a lot of these times, I know I just read off 2 top 5 finishes there. Those are also at courses, by the way, that I would think would suit his game better than this one. I just worry about what his actual upside is for this tournament. Like, if he makes the cut, he comes 47th place, and I don't want that for an $8,000 golfer. And I think there's a lot more volatility that's coming into the mix than my model seems to believe on some of these safety ratings.
Spencer, I almost want to say he's playing too well to play him right now, because he's going to find himself too close to the top of the leaderboard too soon and then fall down and finish 40th kind of thing. You know, like get into like a 2-shot lead going into Saturday morning and then shoot 80 on Saturday. You know, like I can just totally see that happening with Thomas Dietrich. Maybe he doesn't play well enough and backdoors the top 5 like he did this week. You know, like he got up there early on Thursday, fell off down on Friday quickly, and then into no man's land, and then kind of got right back in. So I don't mind him at all. Obviously love a big fan of Sepp Straka, Justin Rose in this range. I think, you know, that Bezzy $8,900. I mean, as much as I like him, that price tag for a guy who's also hasn't, outside of that backdoor top 2 at the Amex, really hasn't been inside the top 10 all that much, you know.
Here's my thoughts on Bezuidenhout. Let's see where the ownership lands. If nobody wants to play him, there is so much that my model likes about him that I will close my eyes at a low-owned $8,900 Bezuidenhout and take my chances. And this is a very similar answer that I have said for almost the entire season so far, that we keep getting these spots with Bezuidenhout that the public seems to eat, whether he's 7,500 or 8,900, the public seems to think in these spots that he doesn't have the upside to warrant that price tag. and he's never really played, but this is a much better course for him. I think at low enough ownership, I'm certainly not looking to fade him, but there are a lot of options that make sense. Like I like your Billy Horschel ticket. I think that works perfectly fine. I would so much rather play Billy Horschel than Chris Kirk or Thomas Dietrich or Keith Mitchell. I don't know if you have thoughts on Denny McCarthy. Like this does kind of feel like a Denny McCarthy course, but you can tell me where you have him in your model.
Yeah, because Denny's struggled around this golf course a lot, but you know what? I'm going to take Denny top 10 plus 425. Denny McCarthy, Spence, inside the top 10, 3 out of every 10 starts. Like, that's what he's doing. So if you're going to give me odds that imply only 19% chance of that, when it's a 30% chance in all historical actualities, I'll take it. And it's a golf course where I can totally see him scrapping it around you. You know, like a feisty blue collar. I'm using the word blue collar so much this week because I think this is what this golf course is. It's the old school 7,200 yard dollar old school grind fest. You know, like we just out here trying to make pars. And to me, Denny and Billy, those are like old school names as well. You know, that just get it done. So I mean,
these are GPP targets to me that I'm hoping that the public think are a little too expensive. And they also naturally convert into every market that you've talked about, whether it's a top 10 or top 20, an outright ticket. These are kind of the routes where I think they make the most sense. And I'm very curious where they come in GPP wise, because there's a way to potentially get different where like, I don't even really like, if we're being technical here, I have a pretty large discrepancy. Like if we're just weighing Horschel, McCarthy, Mitchell, who are all right next to each other, I have those two so far above Mitchell in expectation. Like my model might be a little bit closer for one reason or another, but when I add in some of those safety marks to the mix, like that's why I keep going back to like, there's no scenario that I can find myself on with Keith Mitchell this week. He has a potential upside that's shown, but that upside also never comes to fruition. I don't know how many times I can bet this guy where I'm like, oh, he has upside in my model. And then he leads the tournament in ball striking and still misses the cut by 6 strokes because he loses 15 shots around the green and putting.
That's it. It's literally it. Second in ball striking, 111th in short game.
It's bad.
That's the Keith Mitchell experience for you. So, woof. Justin Rose off a major solid performance, going back to a golf course he's won at. One of my favorite plays in the 8s. In the 7, Spencer, I'll lead us off with a Lucas Glover, top 40 at minus 125. This guy's batting these bad boys out at basically 2 out of every 3 starts. He's finishing inside the top 40. We go to a golf course. Hit that little ropey draw. Hit your little ropey 6-iron or 7, 8-iron into the middle of the green and 2-putt it, buddy, and get your top 40. Like that's the Lucas Glover experience as well. You know, we've got these guys figured out now, Spence. We've been doing it long enough. You're not going to be betting Lucas Glover to finish top 10. Bet him top 40, even at that juice, you know. He's hitting the ball well enough right now to just suck at putting and still finish 37th. You know, that's kind of what I'm hoping for.
I'll give you the answer that just doubles down on what you just said. He's 8th in my model overall. He's 28th for upside. He's 4th for safety.
I've got him 7th for safety and 28th for upside, but I think the upside's got to do with more recent, like our upsides and safety is a different like thing.
I also think the way that it's maybe being interpreted by everybody listening is a little bit different than you and I are both wording that answer there, but it also shows the best market to play Lucas Glover. To me, when you have a safety rating like that, you want to be played as a top 40 bet. Like that's the market that you want to be in. You want to avoid those top 5s and top 10s. Like my model doesn't necessarily think he's the 8th best golfer when we take some of those upside marks into the mix, but there's so much safety built into that profile that it's keeping him above water over all these other names where there's a higher ceiling, but a lower floor that's coming into play. Like this is a very steady profile for me with Glover. So I like Lucas Glover. I like Aaron Rye. I really like Mark Hubbard this week. The one name that I'm going to get different on, and I know that the course history is just a disaster for him. I like JT Poston. That's going to be my unique bullet that I'm going to try to throw into some of these builds. 4 out of 5 missed cuts at this tournament. The one time he didn't miss it, though, he came in 10th place. And then you look at some of these recent results that I talked about, missed cut at the PGA Championship, 60th at the Wells Fargo. What are we talking about there? 2 courses where off the tee data is very important. You put him at RBC Heritage. all of a sudden he jumps into a top 10 sort of a finish there, even a little bit better than that. So I just think that you throw him on the right course and he makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, I planned to come on the show, and when you asked me the cray part of this discussion, I was going to give an answer that is definitely different than I think what public perception is going to be this week. I'm lower on Taylor Moore. I do think that there's a lot of reasons to like Taylor Moore's fit here. I've already given this bet out. I gave it at minus 115 for Sepp Straka to beat Taylor Moore in a head-to-head matchup. Naturally, as the case, the Rotoballer group moves numbers fast. We've moved it up to minus 130. I do think that Data Golf is going to keep it hovering in that range. At that number, I would question how much value we have left, because I had this more in the minus 147 to minus 155 being the proper price. So at minus 130, we're starting to lay a little bit too much juice for what I feel comfortable there. But I'm just lower on Moore. A lot of the ball striking metrics continue to worry me. I had a head-to-head bet on him last week, which was in a very unfortunate situation to where I took him over Lucas Herbert on Saturday. The bet goes south because Herbert ends up performing as the most overvalued commodity that was on the entire list. Should have come in practically dead last from what we got. Then all of a sudden we don't get that matchup offered on Sunday, which is the unfortunate thing, that you can't realize your actual value that you had. Taylor Moore plays better golf. Lucas Herbert goes in the opposite direction. I actually stopped watching the bet because I was getting frustrated with it since I didn't have it. So I'm assuming it won, but at one point that I saw it was up like 6 or 7 strokes. So I'm assuming it won. For anybody out there that ends up telling me it didn't, you would make me very happy that that was the case. But I do think Moore, as optimistic as people are going to be for his fit here, I just worry about the statistical profile. And it's another one of those answers where with JT Poston, there's no course history to talk about, but the statistical data is pointing me in a direction. This outcome, there's no course history to talk about, but the statistical data is pushing me in that same direction of not wanting to be on that play. So really, why is Taylor Moore priced this way? He's priced this way because of the recent form that we've gotten. So I'm willing to bet against this, what I'm going to deem an overcorrection slightly in the market right now.
And that's what we've come to know with, using your model. And at one point I was doing a bit of a long run thing where the short-term success of a golfer can completely change his market value, right? Like, whereas using a 2-year sample size, that the likelihood that, unless you're going from course to course, likelihood you pull up your model the following week and it's a completely different ranking is unlikely, so you're going to keep going back to the well in areas that have a long sustained edge.
There's a reason why my matchups are the strongest area for me. And I have taken, I would say 3 years ago, like specifically when I started filming Better Golf, I've always been a good outright better. But I think that I made some minor shifts in my model, because you can't run the data the exact way you're going to run a matchup for the exact way you're going to run it outright. There's different ways that you need to look at this. And when I made that shift, like that first year with Nick, when I did Better Golf, I had 10 outright winners that year. And every other year since then, it's been about 5 that have been put together. We're at 3 this year. We're trending in that direction of what's going to happen there. But you have to shoot for more upside when you're looking. And a lot of that ends up being, unfortunately, more of the recent data that's coming into play, because that's more of that boom or bust results. But when you look at matchups, the long-term data is really where you can find where the overcorrections happen. And that, to me, is where the biggest edge comes into play, because when my model starts saying, we have seen this price shift 30 points, 40 points, 50 points more than it should have in this spot, all of a sudden now you're giving me a play that, in some examples here, my model thinks should be minus 160, and you're telling me that it's minus 110 both ways, just because the golfer has provided a couple good finishes in a row. Okay, well, that's great, but how have they provided those finishes? Has it been all putter related? Are they doing it at courses that are going to be similar to the course that we have? And that's the key to the whole equation here.
And that's the fun part coming out of the Florida swing, is when you've got all these guys that play well or badly there. Then you go to Texas, it's a totally different situation. And this is the joys, So, Spence, you were speaking to my heart there. Be still, sweetheart. That was some nerdy ass shit that I really, really appreciate from you. And I hope you guys learn that, because you can run a model doesn't mean that that's an outright model. You like people just using a model ranking for everything is likely. Sure, go ahead and do that. Like if you don't have lots of time and you don't want to take it super seriously. But if you're really trying to get the ultimate edge, you got to run different models for different markets.
Yeah,
that's what you got to do.
And everybody, I mean, this is what we try to provide at Rotoballer, which is what I think makes our service so good. And we talk about it on the show. We're very transparent with the way we do it. But obviously having a model of some kind or having an ability to pull numbers is better than having nothing. Like there's steps to this process. Like the worst you could do is just go into the week and randomly pick names out of a hat. That would be, unless you're even still though, I guess I was going to say, unless you're Mia the model in our one and done contest, but even still that's being pulled from top 20 names within both of our models,
yes.
Which is more, we're not just picking like Michael Block out of the mix from it, but that would be the worst thing you could do. The next thing is you just have numbers of some kind and you run the numbers the same way every week. From there, that's actually where the skill comes into play. You run it specifically for different courses. You run it specifically for different markets. You take a much more nuanced approach of like trying to find where your edge is and not being so cookie cutter in some of these results that come out. So, the more research you put in, the better the results you will have. And as I always say, when it comes to price shopping, even with the matchup I just talked about, numbers moving make a massive difference. You have to be very careful to always try to get the best of the number with things. So when you can start creating some numbers or you run a model and you figure out, oh, my model really likes this person over this person, that's when you can jump ahead of a lot of the movement there.
You know what? We give the best information after the hour mark. And that's the beauty of the show, is there's still always good stuff, even after we've gone a little longer, Spence. So really, really, really good. Like, go back and listen to this again, just the last 10, 15 minutes of the show, because I think it's really, really important to know if you've been struggling and don't know why, maybe it's time to maybe just reassess your process, and just maybe you got to compartmentalize the way you run your models, blah, 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 so won't run over that all again. But
and figure out where you're profitable and where you're not profitable. Everybody has different markets that they're better at than others. The last thing you want to do is find out that you're a terrible placement bettor, but 90% of the wagers that you place during the week are in the placement market and you crush the matchups, but the matchups never outweigh what you do in the placement market. So you have to figure out where your strengths are. We all have different strengths. We all have different weaknesses. I can tell you all the portions of my model that I have the blind spots on. I am always lower on Brooks Koepka than I need to be, unless I actually play Brooks Koepka and then he doesn't produce the result that I want. So Brooks Koepka is one of those names that I can't get right. But like knowing that, it makes it much easier to digest that when my model doesn't like him during a major, I'm not going to just go fire 100 matchups against him because I realize that there are red flags that are coming into the mix for my model there.
Yes, dude. Keeping track of your specific bets and your golfers that you're betting on. Because that is the thing. Like you can find Tyrrell Hatton for me. I was like, man, this guy pops in my top 15 on my model every single time. I'm going to be betting him top 20. This was 2-3 years ago, I found out, oh, guess what? Tyrrell Hatton's lost me like 8 units this year. Yeah. And I didn't even realize it until I kind of back checked and checked. So have to record your bets. And the more details you can provide to kind of layer and slice and dice your data to back test it, the better, because then exactly you can find specific golfers, specific bets, specific courses, specific times of the year. Like the fall swing for me when the Corn Ferry Tour guys come in, disaster, because it's all new data. It's a disaster for me. So you got to make sure that you're keeping track of your stuff and having a way to kind of identify where your weaknesses lie. Where my weakness lies this week, Spencer, is with Lee Hodges as an outright at 125-1. Now, if you think about the CJ Cup, I don't know what this golf course is going to do. It could play hard, it could play fast, it could play dry, or it could be wet with all this rain coming. Who the heck knows? But what I do know is Lee Hodges, ultra accurate, and he played really nicely at the Masters, a major last week, and his irons were on point, man. He was looking good. So give me some Lee Hodges at 125-1. The ball striking front of things, more than delightful for me. It's all about whether or not he can make the putts. And that's at 125-1. I will let that answer come to me maybe sometime over Thursday, Friday, potentially Saturday and Sunday. But That's one of my favorite plays in this range.
We've gotten a lot of consistency from him recently also. He had that downturn for a while there, but a lot of top 40 results in these events. So he's clearly found something over the past 2 months. The name for me that I am going to be much higher on than consensus, and it's probably a wager that I would like to find what the best top 40 number is on him, and that's probably going to be my placement wager this week. I really like Justin Lauer, Byron. It's going to come down to very similar answers of what you just talked about. But even if you look at some of these recent results that he's provided, 3 consecutive top 25 finishes, a 28th at the Houston Open. Second for me in that category, I keep going back to about the approach putting and GIR percentage. The weighted proximity is 11th, 26th in my model for weighted scoring, and 8th for me in weighted strokes gained total. So that's a really high-end output for a golfer that is 200 to 1 to win this tournament. I took a sprinkle on him there. I've kind of been this believer that Lauer is a better golfer than a lot of these prices that we get. I think this is a very nice course for him to potentially realize that upside, but it doesn't have to be an all or nothing part of the equation. When you're 200 to 1 and you like him in that market, there's probably going to be value as a top 40, a top 30, a top 20. It comes down to how aggressive you actually want to play some of these names, because, sometimes you're better off when it's a very volatile golfer to potentially just take the top 40 and move on. Sometimes you want to work it up a little bit further up the board. That's something that I'm still trying to build for this week to see where I want to go. But Lauer will be a placement bet for me. I can promise you that when everything is said and done.
Yeah, 38% of the time inside the top 40, 12% inside the top 20. So he's got that little magic spot. But again, that's a past analytic perspective. That's using a historical track record. We for models are projecting at the same time, right? There's a difference between using what's come versus what you can expect based off of the different golf course in front of you.
And I think that's where you find your value is you're projecting your difference compared to sports books. You're projecting your difference compared to other DFS users, whether that's ownership or even what the price tag ends up being with the price tag that's out there. I do think that even with all that answer being said, I am going to bet him as an outright. I'm probably going to cap it as a top 40. Do you know what his number is right now? I haven't even looked at the placement market yet.
I was hoping you could tell me, because I should have had that up.
I mean, any plus number is going to be a value in my model. So when he is plus 150 or higher, or whatever the number ends up being, it's going to be a value inside of my model. But I think a top 40 is probably the ideal way to play that.
Yeah, no, I'm pulling it up right now. I'll let you know, because I think it's important to know he's plus 160, and to me that's totally fair. That's a very, very fair top 40 number.
Yeah,
cool.
I thought he would be 150. I mean, that's 160 is even better than I was hoping for.
Yeah, exactly, and that's ties paid in full at Bet365. So you could potentially find better numbers if you don't take the ties in full. I'm going to go with one of my gourmet players being Chad Ramey Spencer. When I took all of his strokes gained metrics from all the different courses, he ranks inside the top 10 at this golf course for himself. Now, and it's also over a stroke per round gained at Colonial with at least 6. So it suits his game, right? If you think about Sawgrass, the Cognizant, I mean, a first round leader with Chad Ramey is like probably the way to go. If you're looking for, I'm assuming he's probably like 150 to 1. And he's played well here before. He always pops up in the first round leader market. I will be looking to get some sort of exposure there, as well as kind of punting him in this range, right? I feel like the success and consistency we've seen from him at these shorter courses, maybe that's going to be beneficial again this week.
You know what Ramey reminds me, or who Ramey reminds me of this week? It's actually a player in this tournament.
I wanted to say Webb Simpson, but
it's going to be the cheap version of this player. Harris English. I feel like he is the cheap Harris English of this tournament. And I've talked about all the reasons why I like Harris English. Maybe my model is correct more so than the bet that I made for him to win, where maybe there is less upside on Harris English just because of some of the numbers. But this is the Chad Ramey profile for the most part. Immaculate putter on this surface. The accuracy numbers are better than any of the other total driving numbers you're going to get. The proximity numbers leave a lot to be desired. It's essentially the same exact build of Harris English, just one guy is 40 to 1 to win this tournament, and the other one depending on exactly how you want to bet him, is going to be in the triple digit zone up to 300 to 1 plus, and is going to give you a much more enticing top 40 sort of a number out there.
Yeah. Which is not the worst way to go with Chad Ramey, but I'll probably be playing him in some DFS along with Zach Johnson, Joel Damon, Chandler Phillips, and Ben Coles. Those will be my 5K guys that I'll be playing in my Scottie Scheffler lineups. Just have a few of those going on there. So, Spence, what's happening in the fives?
I think for me, like, there were very few names that popped. The best rated player for me was Martin Laird at 5,800.
Mm-hmm.
The second best rated player for me, I believe, was Chad Ramey. Ben Martin's also up there. Like those are the three names that are substantially higher. And then Ryan Moore always grades well inside of my model. But, I've made this example quite a few times, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But these UNLV golfers at Texas courses with the wind always find success. Yeah. And we've seen it with Hoffman before. We've seen it with Ryan Moore. It's a very natural answer that you could expect from them. I guess the only thing with Ryan Moore, and this is what my model can never seem to quite figure out, is are we too far past what he used to be of years past? Or is the Valero 45th Texas tournament, is the Houston Open Texas tournament 31st, the 5th at the Valspar, are those results that we can kind of expect from him here? I kind of think yes. Like, my model has him as a borderline top 50 play. It has him as a potential cut maker compared to these other names. Is it more of that? Can we get a top 10 or top 20 finish out of him? Because if the answer is yes, and we believe it's a yes, he becomes a good value to consider. I guess my one concern would be, what is the actual upside for him? But we have gotten a little bit more of that recently than we had over the course of a handful of months there.
More so than Ramey, really, funnily enough. But we'll have to see there. One of my most intriguing names down here is Joel Damon at 55. I feel like this golf course is a really good fit for him, Spencer. If he can find himself, he's in a Joel, which is, we're always looking for Joel.
He's probably going to grade poorly in any model just because of what we've gotten from him. But yeah, I mean, at his very best, these are the kind of courses, like, you throw him at Pebble Beach, a course like that that's shorter, like, you would expect him to find success and he can pop a result out. This is kind of one of those similar shorter courses where names like him, and I mean, I don't even want to say some of these options because they're just so lost at this point, but like a Matt Kuchar, like there's names like that have the potential to pop. I'm probably not going to get there with Kuchar, although Kuchar was a positive climber in my model for whatever that's worth. And that's not an answer I've had in a while. He's 86th overall, 59th for upside, 95th for safety. I guess the lack of recent results at this tournament are subpar at the end of the day, but 34th at the Wells Fargo is better than we had been getting with that string of miscuts.
Much. Yeah, he's starting to move slowly.
I also think, though, that the majority of these names that we've talked about, these are gross options that, for the most part, that's why making Scottie Scheffler builds are so difficult. You're going to have to make a decision down here. And I have one player for me that's inside the top 50, Martin Laird, and everybody else is in that Ben Martin, Chad Ramey sort of a range of like 50th to 65th. And you are going to have to be very exact on the names that you pick.
Yeah. And Spence, a lot of the guys in the 5K range that I've told you about that I like have 100 in front of their name for their ranking. Like, these are all gut feels that I think, if things go right, can work out for them, kind of thing. So, folks, this has been the Rotoballer PGA show for the Charles Schwab Challenge. Use code TOFF or code MANIAC and get yourself 10% off. For those of you that missed out on the PGA 30% off last week, we're sorry, but you know what? Now you can help me and Spence out and get yourself 10% off. But we really, really appreciate all your support. Multiple people were joining up last week. It was a fun week to get some new people in the Discord and just really start to see Rotoballer PGA side of things grow. And we really appreciate your guys' support. I know Spencer's a big fan of you guys too. And, all of us at Rotoballer are very, very appreciative of everything that you guys do for us, including, hitting that like button, subscribe for the channel over there. So Spencer, hit the people with what's going on in your life as we get out of here.
Yeah, we will have a ton of content as every week for this tournament. You will get both of our models if you sign up. We both have free articles we release. I just released my DraftKings article earlier. It includes, I don't know, I didn't count how many this week, but usually somewhere between 50 to 75 of my individual player rankings. So you will get an idea of exactly where I have a lot of these players ranked. Obviously, inside the model, you'll get more of an in-depth return of you can make a copy, you can filter the rankings from top to bottom, you can attach weights of your own with it, and that's one of the big things that I will provide in there. And my Vegas report will be out tomorrow. There's picks. Like, I am really proud of what we have built at Rotoballer. And, as you said, Byron, like, it's never about trying to get people to sign up. We do a show like this. It's a free show out there for, like, we're not trying to charge people to listen to the show.
No.
Anybody that jumps into the chat, we are always more than willing to answer any questions that you guys have. And on the back end of that equation, though, there are a lot of things that we provide that even add more to any of this. So whether you like the free content or you are willing to jump in and try Rotoballer up at the next level, we have something for everybody out there. So I do want to tell everybody, thank you for the support that you show Byron and I for this show. Thank you for the support of anybody who reads either one of our articles. And without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do this.
Seriously, literally, without you guys, it's not possible. Like, literally. So really, really appreciative of you all. We're also very appreciative of Rotoballer, who is part of the Rotoballer PGA show for the Charles Schwab Challenge this week. Please be sure to check out all of our premium stuff over at rotoballer.com as you get out of there. Till next week, we've got the RBC Canadian, I believe, Spencer, next week. So that'll be a fun little journey to kind of go along. We've got some, maybe we can work on our tackling and who's most likely to get tackled on the 18th green, celebrating a buddy of theirs celebration there. So till then, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. Good luck this week. May Keegan Bradley, may all of our outrights take care of business for us. So till then, folks, thank you so much.